Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Watching Kevin's presentation, I just got a quick question for everybody. Does everyone here believe that if every single child in America in public school had an iPad or a device like an iPad, that our education system would be better? Yes or no? Okay. They only cost $400, $500. So if we bought them in the millions, they would be a lot less. And education now for a public school student costs around $6,000 or $7,000. Why aren't we investing in our public education system? What's the problem with that? Tweet that, please. Let's invest in our public education system. Let's get our kids online. If we build a 21st century public education system, we'll have a 21st century economy. But I'm here to tell you a different story. So imagine if the people, we got this first slide up, the people who controlled the market for producing these went to Congress and tried to stop people from making these. Or imagine if the people who were making and controlling the market for these went to Congress to get people from, stop people from making those. Well, that's the story of SOPA. How many of you know what SOPA stands for? Do you also know about PIPA? Okay, so SOPA is the Stop Online Piracy Act, which was making its way through Congress at the end of last year. It was proposed by the copyright industry, and it died a very nasty death on January 18th when this woman and 3,000 people like her showed up on the streets of New York in front of a couple of senators' offices to protest SOPA, and also 14 million people signed petitions across the world protesting SOPA, and sites like Wikipedia and, before them, Tumblr and others blacked out certain sections of their sites in order to inform people about the threat of SOPA. Now, Congress, in reality, has no clue how the internet works. And, I mean, I always tell this joke, politicians don't know the difference between a server and a waiter. I've been telling that joke for 15 years, which is very sad, actually. But what happened with SOPA was that the copyright industry, which had been building up relationships and has been funding Congress and when I say Congress, I'm referring to representatives of Congress and senators, has been funding their campaigns through traditional lobbying and other methods for decades. In fact, you're going to hear from a former lobbyist by the name of Jack Abramoff a little bit later, who can maybe tell you a little bit more about how that machinery actually works. But with SOPA, what happened was that people were, from the copyright industry, were basically frustrated by the fact that the market had changed so much that they were able to convince members of Congress that piracy was a threat to American jobs and that Congress needed to act to stop online piracy. And so they proposed a bill which in the end received overwhelming support from both parties in sponsorship of that bill, because they did such an amazing job, the copyright industry did such an amazing job convincing senators and congressmen that this was a jobs-killing situation, that Congress needed to jump in and to change the law, which would allow the government to literally shut down sites that were, in their mind or in a judge's mind, infringing on copyright. The internet industry and a wider internet public viewed the bills as actually threats to not only potential commerce, but to free speech. And so there was this ongoing battle, and eventually, as I just mentioned, on January 18th, the bills were killed. But that's the good news. The bad news is that what's going to happen next is going to be much worse. Congress supported those bills and reacted to those bills because they were getting lots of money from friends of theirs that they'd been getting money from for years. And when the online community spoke up and shut it down, Congress all of a sudden said, okay, let's rethink the SOPA legislation. Let's rethink the PIPA legislation. But not one single member of Congress is going to lose their seat over the SOPA sponsorships. Not one. And the copyright industry now is not going to go through the process of going back to the drawing boards and trying to reconfigure SOPA or PIPA to Congress in a way that it could pass. In fact, what they're going to try to do is the internet is no longer going to be attacked by a frontal assault like SOPA. It's going to be attacked by 1,000 little cuts. A little piece of regulation here, a little provision here, a change in a law here. How many of you have heard of CISPA? So CISPA is a cybersecurity bill. There's actually 3 of them that are making their way through the House right now. How many have heard of TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership? So that's a trade agreement that's being negotiated behind closed doors. My point is that there are major incumbent forces that are threatened by the open internet. And the open internet is not prepared to fight the battle to make sure that the internet remains open and free, not just for a 21st century economy, but also for a potential 21st century democracy. In the Arab Spring in Cairo, Mubarak was threatened by people using social media to organize protests. And he ordered Vodafone to shut down the internet. What happened was that many people who were following the protests online, because they were trying to find out what was going on, were actually forced into the streets, not because they were protesting that the internet had been shut off, but because they were trying to find out what was happening with the protests, and inadvertently put actually more people on the streets, which gave the impression that there were more people protesting. You can shut down the public internet, but you cannot shut down the internet public. And there's actually a correlation between the people in the Arab Spring who use social media not just to organize themselves in protest, but to get the messages of their protest out to the world, and the protesters in Moscow, or the protesters in Israel, or the protesters at Occupy Wall Street, who believe that through connecting people to each other, there is an opportunity to build a more equitable world. Governments, nation-states, corporations, and incumbent interests who have made their money in the 20th century will do everything they can to stop that from happening. And we are not prepared. I'll give you an example. How many people here actually have read the terms of service of the last app or website you signed onto? Do you have any idea what happens to the data collected by the companies that you're signing on to? Do you have the trust to know that that data is protected? It's our responsibility to try to figure out how to make sure that the internet stays open. I'll give you another example. In New York City, the average cost of getting online is about $70 or $80 per month. That means that 40% of New Yorkers are not able to get online. 60% of New York City public school students are not able to get online at home. Schools are only open 15% of all the time in the year. Kids are in class only a fraction of that time, and in computer class even a smaller fraction of that time. Now, Jeff mentioned something earlier, an organization earlier called the New York Tech Meetup, which I happen to be privileged to chair. 25,000 members of the New York tech community who are basically creating a renaissance of startup innovation in New York. We have zero unemployment in our industry. Zero. In fact, I would argue that we have negative unemployment because many people are actually trying to do 2 jobs or are holding a job and are thinking about a startup they're going to start on their own at the same time that they're working somewhere else. And I'm sure many of you are thinking the same thing. We have a massive disconnect between the policies that are being promoted by our governments and the realities of our connected age. And it's not going to change because a couple of senators got their faces slapped over SOPA and PIPA. It's only going to change when we start electing people who actually understand how the internet works. When we start electing people who operate in a different currency, not a currency of money and politics, but a currency of connectivity, a currency that's based on trust, a currency that's based on feeling connected to your peers and to information that you think is valuable, and a democratization of information. We don't have a democracy like that in our country right now. Think about it. We don't actually elect our elected leaders. They elect us. They gerrymander their districts to look like snakes in order to keep themselves in office. We have an electoral college, which this year for the presidential campaign is going to make the election happen in 12 states, not in all 50. We only vote on Tuesdays. Do you know why we vote on Tuesdays? Does anybody here know why we vote on Tuesdays?
That was the one day when we were an agricultural society, when the farmers were able to go and vote.
Exactly. So we vote on Tuesdays because it was market day. But how ridiculous is that? We should be voting on weekends or voting for an entire week. If we can go to a bank and we can actually check our bank accounts, take money out of an ATM, and do it securely, we should be able to vote online. Also, why does Congress have to go to Washington every week to vote? Why not let them vote from home? Or let them come in once a month. If we allowed Congress to vote from home, they would spend more time with their constituents, and more importantly, we'd have more women running for Congress. Our democracy is broken because we have not been investing in our public education system. We do not teach civics in schools. We do not teach civic participation. People feel alienated from our political system. And it's abstract for them, and they don't feel that they're being connected to. And most politicians who might be using Twitter and Facebook are only doing it to send messages out. They're not listening. So we can complain about it, we can argue about the punditry, we can talk about whether social media is going to change the election, we can talk about big data. What I'm trying to impart to you is that the future of our democracy and the future of our education system, and if you would like to see every student in America have the experience of watching Kevin and to be inspired to change their lives, it's not going to happen because of the elected leaders we have now, it's going to happen because of you. So, it's not going to happen because we're going to give money to Barack Obama or Mitt Romney. It's not going to happen because of some mayoral candidate running for New York who's going to claim that they're going to keep the Bloomberg administration's policies going or are going to dismantle the policies. It's going to happen because of a fabric of civic participation that happens in your own neighborhoods, when neighbors talk to each other, when we use technology to connect people with each other. The future of the internet and open democracy is in your hands. Let's seize it, let's build it, and let's make the world a better place. Thank you very much.